Good day, everyone. I hope that you're having a wonderful opportunity. I just hope that as we finalize our geography class, that you have seen how God has worked through the design of the earth to prepare man for his glory, for his understanding, and for us to glorify him in everything that we do. Well, heading into our last lesson, we're going to look at state geography. We're going to look at how Oklahoma's geography plays into the continent of history, the continent of nature, how it plays into everything that we've built into, but also how it fulfills our design and destiny as a people here in Oklahoma. So we're going to hop into this. Well, when you break down Oklahoma, researchers have seen that there are 10 geographic regions in Oklahoma that make it distinct, that make it unique. Okay, remember, Oklahoma is part of that low depression, those low plains, okay, between the primary and the secondary highlands. Okay, so we're going to see how these 10 regions fit into Oklahoma. We're going to break it down and see a little bit about each one. Well, when you look at this map of Oklahoma, we see that there are 10 distinct areas. We see the Ozark Plateau. In yellow, we see the Prairie Plains. We see the Ouachita Mountains. We see the Sandstone Hills right here, this tan. Arbuckle Mountains are this deep green. The Wichita Mountains is this black. The Red River Plains is this like pink gray down here. The Red Bed Plains is this red. The Gypsum Hills are silver, and then the High Plains is this brown. Okay, these 10 regions impact the people and the development of the state of Oklahoma. We see that these 10 regions will guide and direct the type of vegetation, the type of resources, and the jobs and economy that flourishes within that area. So we're going to break down the state of Oklahoma, how geography of Oklahoma impacts the United States and impacts us as a people. Well, when we head into this, we see that the Ozark Plateau, which is going to be near Missouri and Arkansas, okay, up in that northern region, we see that it's filled with rivers and these steep valleys. Okay, look at these images. If you've ever been to Missouri or Arkansas for a family trip or anything like that, this has a great resemblance of it. Okay, it doesn't just stop in these states; it flows from Arkansas, Missouri into part of Oklahoma, and so we see that this distinction is unique. Okay, this is one of the many characteristics that God created in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is extremely diverse, not only in our jobs and in our people, but in our geographic regions. We then see what Oklahoma is known for, what people think of when they hear Oklahoma. They think of prairies. They think of plains. You hear the book Little House on the Prairie. When people read this, when people have studied this, they think of this. They think of this is what Oklahoma looks like. Now, yes, we do have a large part of prairies and plains in Oklahoma, but that's not just our entire state. There's more to it. There's more distinction. Well, when we look at the Prairie Plains, we see that it is west and south of the Ozark Plateau. This area, it's the primary leader in coal and oil. Remember, what did I say coal is used for? That's right. Everything. Companies can take coal, refine it, and take elements out that help produce anything and everything. The plastics, the parts of the material in our whiteboard, our water bottles, our clothing, our shoes, our cars, everything has a bit of coal in it when you break it down to its core. And then oil is used for what? Yes, it's used for primarily vehicles. Okay, airplanes, cars, ships. We see this. Oil primarily is used for this, but it's used for manufacturing, for producing the materials, the products that we want to sell. So we see this. Along with this region, we also see that it's a great place for cattle, for housing large amounts of cattle and producing beef for the nation. And so we see that one of the towns in this area is Muskogee, and these region within the Prairie Plains, they produce spinach, beans, carrots. We see that the Prairie Plains is able to have fertile ground. It's able to produce a large quantity of the produce that we need every day. And so we see that Prairie Plains are unique, are distinct. And so we see this already difference in Oklahoma, having two drastically different ranges already. The Ozark Plateau and these Prairie Plains, those are two distinctly different areas. But now we're looking at a third, the Owachi Mountains. We see that this is going to be unfamiliar. If you live in Oklahoma City or west of Oklahoma City, you don't really see this. You primarily you might see some elevation in some of the, hills. Maybe you might run into some plateaus and stuff like that, but you don't see a continuous amount of mountain ranges. However, we see that in the southeastern part, okay, we're looking like touching the border of Arkansas, because this mountain system is within Arkansas as well. These mountains, they have sandstone ridges. They are running east to west, and they are going to form the roughest land in Oklahoma. I mean, look at those pictures. I mean, it's beautiful. It's these not rolling mountains, but these steep elevations and drops. We see these valleys, these depressions. So we see this idea of a mountain system within Oklahoma. Now, it's not as large as, some mountains in the United States, such as maybe, I don't know, the Rocky Mountains, but we still see God's hand building and intertwining everything in Oklahoma for his good, for his purpose. Within these mountains, we see that there are streams and there are rivers that provide the natural resources, that provide the natural vegetation with water. Remember, what are the three grand mechanisms that each play a part in itself? Land, that's right. Atmosphere, okay. And then water. Okay, we see that these three things are crucial to sustaining the environment that we have, the world that we have. And so the vegetation in this region needs a large quantity of water. And so we see that these rivers, these springs, the rainfall in this area is going to be tremendous to sustain the land that God provided in this area. We then see that the next region that we migrate into is going to be the Sandstone Hills. This region is going to be very similar to, I don't know, I grew up watching these old westerns with my grandpa, primarily John Wayne and all these other cowboys. And what we see is that this is a lot of the movies, this kind of what old western style movie. And so we see that this has similarities. We see that it's not a lot, it doesn't look like it has a lot of moisture. It's really dry, kind of sandy, a lot of dirt, sandstorms rolling through, some elevation here and there, but for the most part it's just flat and dry. And so we see that some of these hills can reach, a distinct height, 250, 400 feet high. We see that there is some elevation within this region, but it's going to be flat. And once we get to closer to the Awachi Mountains and the other regions, we see that these forests start breaking into this region. It's not just straight plains, but we see this. We also see that this region is where Oklahoma began developing its oil empire. Oklahoma is known for producing large quantities of oil and having a lot of oil reserves. And so this region right here was the development of it. The region was the one that was pushing us into the light of our nation for oil production. And then we head into the Wichita Mountains. This small region in Oklahoma still is distinct. It's unique. So we see that in the southwestern region in Oklahoma, we can find the Wichita Mountains. We see that these mountains are so old that they date prior to the flood. Okay, before God called down the flood to wipe the earth clean and start anew. And so what can you find in this area? Well, you can find different types of minerals and different types of elements in this region. Granite, gabbro, we see this. But we also have a wildlife refuge on this area. If you've ever been to the wildlife refuge, what do you find? Yeah, okay. Bison. No, whoever said elephants, no, you don't find elephants in this area. Okay, deer. Okay, and then you'll also see a lot of longhorn steer. So we see that this area is unique. Okay, we are trying to preserve this area. You can drive to the top of it and it's extremely beautiful because everything else around it is extremely flat, extremely low. So you're able to see for miles and miles on end. So we see that this is another distinction in God's glory, in God's hand. And then, God could have stopped there. and Oklahoma would have been extremely diverse. But he continues adding more. He continues setting it up for his glory. So we see that the Red River Valley region is this border between Texas and Oklahoma. And we see that there's a lot of rolling plains, these kind of low hills, like in the picture above. And we see that, it's not going to have a lot of elevation. It's going to have a lot of hills that have a lot of forests that migrate back into plains because it's near the sandstone hills. We see this because it's a valley region. Okay, it's the low area. It's going to have a lot of water. And this water, the more water you have, the more it's going to sustain life. And so we see that the soil in this area is going to be extremely fertile. It's going to be sandy. It's going to be able to produce a large amount of vegetation. Okay, we see cotton, peanuts, vegetables. We see that this stuff is grown in this area. It's able to produce large quantities of it. Another way that makes Oklahoma diverse, we don't just grow wheat and oil and have coal and oil. We have so much other produce that we can produce. Oklahoma is extremely diverse. God created it for a reason. So we see that this region, if you ever drive through Oklahoma into Texas, you'll happen upon a small part of this area. And you can kind of see some of these distinctions compared to the Arbuckle Mountains and the Sandstone Hills, how you see this distinction to it. Well, we then have the Red Bed Plains. And this region is to the west, okay? So we're moving east to west from Arkansas to New Mexico and Colorado. That's how we're migrating across Oklahoma. And so one of the things that we see is called the Red Bed Plains. Why do you think this area is called the Red Bed Plains? Anyone? I'll help you out. Well, we see that the soil in this region is red dirt, that red clay that you sometimes see if you've ever, dug a hole in the ground or played in the dirt. Okay, you see this. This is one of the only regions that you will find this red clay, this red dirt. And so hence Red Bed Plains, you have a bed of red dirt. You kind of see where they're coming from. Well, this is the largest region in Oklahoma. It starts up in Kansas and makes its way through the center of the state, the heart of the state, where Oklahoma City, parts of Lawton, we see this, that it extends all the way from the top, all the way down to parts of Texas. So we see this area. Well, within the Red Bed Plains, we see that in the east, so closer to Arkansas, it's going to have some forested areas. And then in the west, closer to Colorado and New Mexico, it's going to have more grass. It's not going to have a lot of trees. Okay, so we see this, that there's not rigid lines. It's not a stop and a start. Each of these regions flow into each other and influence each other in these distinctions where they have borders. They influence each other and share different distinctions. So we see this influence, we see this impact. Well, another region that we see is the Gypsum Hills. Well, this is going to lie west of the Red Bed Plains. And it's going to blend into the High Plains. If you've ever driven to Colorado, I have several times. You see this distinction. You see these hills that are just randomly out there. They're kind of like, they almost look like plateaus because they look so flat at the top. Okay, we see this distinction. Within this area, we see that hence the name Gypsum Hills. It has gypsum, this mineral, this rock within it. And when the sunlight hits these gypsum from a certain angle at certain times of the day, it makes it shine. It makes it look like there's glass or like a mirror on top of these hills. And so people start giving these mountains the nickname Glass Mountains, Glass Hills, because it, from a distance, you see the shining, you see the sparkling because of the mineral that God put there. Just another unique characteristic, another unique element that God created within this state. And then finally, heading into the last region is the high plains. I mean, God, in his all powerful, all knowing self, created Oklahoma to be extremely diverse. I mean, we have 10 distinct and different regions within Oklahoma that play a part into our state. So the High Plains is this region specifically, it's in the Panhandle. Now, not all of it, but the bulk of it. We see that this region is this area between, Texas and Colorado and Kansas. And so if you ever, continuing on with what I was talking about a minute ago, if you ever drive through from here to Colorado to go maybe skiing or backpacking or camping or whatever, and you drive through this region, what do you think of? It's flat. Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness. It goes on forever. I mean, look at these pictures. It's so flat. I can see from here to Canada. Every time I drive up there, when I'm driving through it, I literally feel like my car is on a treadmill. I don't feel like I'm moving at all. There's not a lot of towns, and what towns are up there are super small. It's this region that God created specifically for a purpose, to have another distinction, to have another impact in Oklahoma's culture, in Oklahoma's people, in Oklahoma's development. So we see that this region plays an impact in Oklahoma. And so we see, when we look at this, we see moving from east to west, so from Arkansas to Colorado, we see how the state slowly and slowly begins to morph into plains. Okay, we have a lot of elevation closer to Arkansas. We have a lot of forests. We have a lot of plateaus and hills. And then when you start getting to the Panhandle, you're starting to see that these mountains and forests are turning into plains and into different types of grassland. So we see this distinction. We see God created Oklahoma for a purpose. Well, when you look at Oklahoma, we see that there are other distinctions that make our state unique, that make Oklahoma who it is. One of those elements are the natural resources. Okay, what's some of the natural resources that Oklahoma is known for? All right, yeah, oil. We've talked about also coal, yes. Meat, okay, cattle, yeah, meat. Wheat, okay. Anything else? All right, so those are the big four that we see. And so when we look at this, we see that Oklahoma ranks high nationally. Okay, we have one of the greatest amount of natural resources in our state compared to the rest of the nation. And so we produce a lot of petroleum. Petroleum's another name for oil. Yes. Good job. You are learning something. I'm so happy. So oil, natural gas liquids, coal, stone. We see these different minerals, these products God created for Oklahoma to have an influence nationally. So we see that oil and gas, so natural gas, have historically, since before Oklahoma became a state, this has been a major component in our economy. We see that networks of pipelines move the petroleum products to refineries and markets throughout the region and elsewhere in the country. We see that it starts here and gets refined sometimes here in Oklahoma, sometimes in Kansas or Texas, and then it gets sent out to the rest of the country. We see Oklahoma makes a national impact with our resources, with our products. However, one thing that we see that takes place is that in the 1980s, we also saw it early, 2000s, that the oil and gas prices fluctuated. And when this economic depression hits, it causes Oklahomans to start losing their jobs. Okay, why would prices be so important for oil and gas? Okay. All right, what else? All right, I like that. Yep. A little bit. Okay. So what we see is that if oil prices are high, if gas is 250, $3 a gallon, people aren't going to travel as much, which means people aren't going to be investing as much money into oil and gas. And so if that economy is low, and that's what a large part of Oklahoma's economy is going to be, it's going to hurt a lot of Oklahomans. And so we see that coal and the gas are the two main sources of power energy within our state, within our nation, really. Now, yes, there are others that have been coming up, but this is what we've been known for. Now, when we start getting to present day, we see that one element that Oklahoma has been leading the charge in is geothermal and wind energy. They've been trying to figure out a more beneficial energy source that could possibly replace coal and gas, coal and oil. And so when you travel outside of Oklahoma City, you see all these windmills, these massive ones. That is part of the wind industry. We see this. We see God created Oklahoma for a specific purpose, and He's given man these ideas to try new things, to take what He has given them and try to produce these energies so that man can benefit from it. Well, with the natural resources, with the geographic region, it also influences the manufacturers. Okay, what Oklahoma produces, what we use when we take these coal. Remember, I said coal is found in everything, really. And so when we take these products, what can we produce with it? Well, we see that one of the primary elements of manufacturing in Oklahoma is the raw materials. Are taking these raw materials, this oil, this gas, this coal, these other products, and refining it and then selling it to other companies around the world and around the nation. Now, even though it's a small part of our economy, we also see that there are other components that play into this. What is just right down the road? They fly over us all the time. Tinker, yes, Tinker Air Force Base. This is a sector, okay, that's what they call it, or a manufactured good within our state. I have a friend that works on AWACS. He's an engineer. Every day for the past 5, 6 years, when he goes to work, he works on the electronics, on the mechanics, on all these parts of the AWACS. And so we produce this. We create industrial machinery, that will be sent nationwide for companies to help their assembly lines or to help their production lines, whatever it is. And we also see that because one of our main natural resources is, yes, oil and coal, we have to transport it. How are we going to get it from here to there? How are we going to get it from here to Colorado? How are we going to get it here to Florida? What's a easy way that you can do it? All you need is a driver's license. Semis. Thank you, whoever said that. Semis. And so we see that transportation is going to be a extremely beneficial economy and manufactured sector in Oklahoma. In order to take our raw products, in order to take our goods and sell it to the rest of the world and sell it to the rest of the state and the rest of the nation, we have to be able to transport it. And so we see that these industries are going to flourish and provide Oklahoma with the jobs that it needs to have. So industry and commerce. So we see what's produced, what's manufactured, what's harnessed, and then what is going to be produced in Oklahoma. Well, so when we look at Oklahoma, we have a lot of military bases, a lot of Air Force bases. I grew up near one in Enid. There's one here in Tinker. Okay, so we see aviation, energy, oil, coal, wind, gas. We see that Oklahoma is an important factor in our nation and worldwide in producing these parts. So we see that when we produce oil and natural gas, we are one of the high-ranking states. When we're producing our fields and our corn and our wheat, we're not as high as we used to be. Okay, we don't have as many farmers as we used to, but we're still producing a large quantity. We're still producing a large amount of products. So we see that this is one of our industries: agriculture, aviation, energy. These resources that we have manufactured and now are selling it. We are now shifting it to other parts of the world, other parts of the nation. And so we see this, but it doesn't just stop there. That's not all that Oklahomans know for. We see that one that people don't realize that we're leading is weather research. Okay, weather research. A lot of people, they want to become a meteorologist or study the weather. They come to Oklahoma to study that. Okay, what every spring we have to do drills for what? Ha! Thank you, Kufal. Tornadoes. We're one of the only states in our nation that have tornadoes, active tornadoes every single year. If you want to study weather patterns, you have to be in that area. We've also talked about in the past, and we will see it this year, how in a single day there can be 4 distinct season changes. It can be raining, and then it can easily shift to snow, and then it can be kind of warm, no weather, and then it can be extremely brutally hot within a matter of hours. Oklahoma is so unique. God created Oklahoma for a distinct purpose, to play into his plan. And so we see that weather is crucial. We also see another product, our tires. I know that sounds so weird. Who would have known? But remember, we are transporting a lot of goods. What do semis and cars need to drive on the roads? Well, they need a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. But they need tires. And so Oklahoma is taking these tires and refining them and producing a large quantity for all of North America. And so we see that Oklahoma is benefiting our nation. It's benefiting the world. It's benefiting our continent. But it doesn't just stop there. Within our state, we see that aerospace is a major player, bringing $11 billion annually. Now, yes, we are not as big as, Florida or California, but for our small state, for our hillbilly state that people say, we are one of the leaders in aerospace and developing these aircraft that will be used to travel into space to the International Space Station. We also see that in Tulsa, it is home to the largest airline maintenance base in the world. Wait, what? I know. Who would have thought Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the middle of the United States, has the largest airline maintenance base in the world? I mean, that's the headquarters for American Airlines. That's where they are going to do all their maintenance and engineering projects on all their aircraft. And so we see that this industry, it's growing in Oklahoma. It takes up 10% of our industry. That is a large part. There's 24 of us in here. That's saying like 2 of us in this classroom, maybe 2.5 of a person, are going to enter into this sector that we are one way or another going to work with aircraft, or we're going to be employed by one of these groups. That is huge. Oklahoma, we are so unique. We are built for a purpose. God had a plan long before anyone ever lived in Oklahoma. Well, heading into the last part of our lesson, we see that there is local government. And what makes Oklahoma unique? Well, we see that back in 1889, some 10,000 homesteaders settled what is now downtown Oklahoma City, creating a tent city in a single day. Within 10 years, so by 1899, heading into the 1900s, we see that the population had doubled and created the permanent settlement and the future capital of Oklahoma, Oklahoma City. By the time Oklahoma was admitted to the Union in 1907, Oklahoma City had already supplanted Guthrie, the territorial capital, as the population center and commercial hub of the new state. Soon after, the capital was moved from Guthrie to Oklahoma City. And so we see that Oklahoma is a young state, only a little over 100 years old. It's not like we are New York, Virginia, that have been around for 250 plus years. Okay, so we see this distinction. We see this playing out. And so within Oklahoma, our state is unique. I've been saying that God had a purpose for it. And so we see that the government of Oklahoma is going to be modeled exactly after our federal government. There's an executive, a legislative, a judicial branch in Oklahoma. We have a governor who is basically the president of our state. We have a Supreme Court of Oklahoma who rules over court cases. We have a House, we have a Senate that guide the policies and laws within our state. What we see is that there are 77 counties with jurisdiction over most local government functions within each respective domain. We have 5 congressional districts and a voting base with a majority in the Republican Party. Now, that's not always been true, but we see nowadays that's how it is. We see that state officials are elected by plurality voting. We just had an election for the president. With that presidential election, we also had senators, House of Representatives. We had these politicians that were running for office, and the people voted. Okay, we are a republic, a rule by law. One of our laws is that we have the opportunity to vote. You can vote for an individual, but that individual must win the majority in order to win that election. And so when we look at this, okay, the 77 distinct district courts, okay, each county has its own court. Okay, so we're in the heart of Oklahoma. We're in Oklahoma County. I grew up in Garfield County. That's where Enid is at, okay? This is where, if you get a traffic ticket or, you got to go to court to sit on a case, you would go to your county court. We also see that that's part of the judicial branch. The judicial branch are the judges, okay? Judicial judge. Okay? Now the legislative, we see, has impacts to this as well, okay? So the Oklahoma Judicial also contains 2 independent courts, a court of impeachment and the court of the judiciary. There are 2 courts of last resort. The state Supreme Court hears civil cases, and the state court of criminal appeals hears criminal cases. Judges of those 2 courts, as well as the court of civil appeals, are appointed by the governor upon the recommendation of the state judicial nomination commission, and are subject to a nonpartisan retention vote of a 6-year rotation schedule. This is why our governor is so important, because they have an influence on everything. They have an influence on all elements of our government. And so we look at the executive branch. This is our governor. Governor Kevin Stitt is our governor, our president of our state. He's our governor. But it's much more than just him. It's his staff. It's his cabinet. It's his elected officials. And so we see that the principal head of government, the governor, is the chief executive of the Oklahoma executive branch, serving as the ex officio commander-in-chief of the Oklahoma National Guard when not called into federal use, and reserving the power to veto bills passed through the legislation. The responsibilities of the executive branch include submitting the budget, ensuring that state laws are enforced, and ensuring that peace within the state is maintained. So we see that the state of Oklahoma has distinction, but also has similarities. Our government is based upon the federal government. We have local government that we deal with on a daily basis. We are impacted by this. We see this grow and we see this flourish, and we see that Oklahoma is distinct in its story. It plays a part in the history of God's story, in His story of mankind, in the story of liberty. And so we see this, that our local government is to protect the individual. It was created for a republic. A republic is a rule by law. We're not a democracy. We're not the rule by majority. We're ruled by law. We have laws and officials in place that have to obey laws. And if they don't, they will be taken out of office. We see this. And so we see that Oklahoma is unique. Oklahoma is distinct. So that is the end of our class. That is geography. We see how everything is influencing one another. There's factors that build into everything. So I hope you learned something. I hope that you have a wonderful day. Have a blessed day, and I will see you guys later.